Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Karma and this is my talk on the pet peeves of grammar and style, something I usually do in the classroom, but we have to do it this way for now, and that's okay. So first, what's a pet peeve? It's something that bothers you that doesn't bother everyone, like for me, loud chirping, chewing or slurping, or when people don't put their shopping carts away, or when I go into a store and there's a package that's already been opened that's just sitting on the shelf. I, by the way, found out who's doing that. It's my aunt. I saw her do that at Target. She opened socks to feel them and then put them back on the shelf and did not think that there was anything wrong with that. I apologize to you on her behalf. I also discovered several years ago with a roommate that I really hate it when someone leaves all the kitchen cabinets open. Sometimes I would walk into the kitchen and it looked like a scene from The Sixth Sense, if you've seen that. And my roommate would be like, well, I might need something out of that cabinet later, as if it's going to save him all that time. It was absolutely awful. This is, of course, not a talk about just the pet peeves of life. This is a talk about grammar and style. And I will say that most of the things that bother me as a writing instructor, of course, bother your other instructors, and not just your other writing instructors, but your other professors. For example, we don't like it when you use literally wrong. If you say, I literally died, well, that's not possible for you to be saying that because you'd be dead. And like, the only way to make that sentence true is if we're having a seance and you're trying to tell me what happened to you from beyond the grave. All right, let's get started. And we're starting with how we start, which is bad beginnings. Your first sentence. In real life, people can stop reading if your first sentence sucks. If you send in your application for grad school and you have a terrible first sentence, it turns them off in some way, or it's got an error in it, they can stop reading. There's no law that they have to keep going. Now, I, of course, have to keep reading no matter how bad your first sentence is. But we want to try to make sure that the very first thought I have of your paper is, ugh, what a terrible first sentence. So let's look at some examples of terrible first sentences. In the study by Professor Zeig and Professor Kleiner, Professor Zeig and Kleiner found there's no reason ever to have the same words in a row like that. We could just say the study by Professor Zeig and Kleiner found. There you go. One of my students very recently had these two sentences in her paper. There is an urgent need to improve the living conditions of the homeless community in San Francisco. The homeless community in San Francisco, just what are we doing? What Stop it. We can just combine these and we have a perfectly fine sentence that doesn't make your reader go crazy. In today's society, you're not allowed to start a paper in my class this way. It is a cliche. It means you're always generalizing, and we just don't need it, so cut that out. Sometimes when I give students an essay that they're going to respond to, they have this weird opening where they're like, recently I read an essay, as if they just came across it. Okay, plus, if you're writing about an essay, I know that you read it. You don't have to tell me you read it. So just start talking about the essay. The essay by this, da da da. Um, Repetition this way. When wearing uniforms, it can help, but the it is wearing uniforms, so we can just say wearing uniforms can help. I see students start this way. According to Cole, he says that, but the he is Cole. And so there's two options here. One is that you're being wordy, or Cole is the kind of person who talks about himself in third person. There's actually a word for this. Some people do it. For example, The Rock, who often asked, can you smell what The Rock is cooking? Again, when he should have, to not be doing that, have said, can you smell what I'm cooking? It would not have been as fun. But, the people that you're citing are probably not talking about themselves in third person. So just say, according to Cole, whatever Cole says, whatever. There you go. Now, for this one, this is the first example that actually is not just stylistically wrong, this is grammatically wrong. You cannot start your sentence this way. When I ask students what's grammatically wrong, they often tell me, oh, you don't need those commas. Okay, you totally need those commas. In the short story is a prepositional phrase. You set it off with a comma, you start your sentence. By Tim O'Brien. Prepositional phrase, you're supposed to set off with a comma, then start your sentence. But what you'll notice is your sentence then starts with shows. You don't have a subject for it. You can't say in the short story shows. You can't say by Tim O'Brien shows. There's two ways to fix this. You can say the short story by Tim O'Brien shows, or you can say in the short story Tim O'Brien shows. But you have to do one of these. This is an error that I see very, very often in student papers. And again, you do not want your very first sentence to not have a subject in it because you're not quite paying attention to structure. Okay, this is long. This was from just a 250-word essay about a poem, and the student had just a terrible opening to this. So let's go through it. Throughout the time of parent and child relationship, SIC means there's a mistake I've left in. There have been conflicts between these two groups. This is a since the dawn of time sentence. It will piss me off. Right? It's a generality. It's completely unnecessary. These conflicts have been conveyed through novels, music, and poems. You know, I could keep listing shit and songs and this. It's just a pointless sentence. There are many moments in the life of a relationship between a parent and child. Yes. There are times when these two parties are at each other's throat, and there are times when they share intimate moments together. Yes, your audience needs none of this, especially in a 250-word paper. The student finally starts talking about the poem here. In the poem, My Old Man, Charles Bukowski describes a relationship between a father and a child through the eyes of his 16-year-old son. This relationship is played with ups and downs of parental mood swings. In this poem by Charles Bukowski, a boy describes the ups and downs of a relationship between him and his father. So you'll notice that we have two sentences about the poem and then a summary sentence about the poem. This could just be these two sentences here, and that would have made me a lot happier. Okay, next is transitioning. And we want to transition in a way that's fluid. So here we're coming out of a paragraph. This shows that the trees in the miniature forest filter out the smoke to create a smoke-free community. And then we've got another paragraph. Paper is so we're starting with a generality. We're not connecting the ideas. There is a logical relationship between these two ideas, though, and we just need to make sure our reader knows what it is. So this could be revised to say something like, in addition to using living trees to filter smoke, we need dead trees for paper. Hey, they understand that what I'm saying is, I'm going to talk about an additional use here. Not thinking your ideas or your wording through. One of the most thought-provoking sentences I ever got in a paper was this one: drugs can lead to death, which can lead to other problems. Think about that for a minute. The student was writing about why he would not do drugs, which, great, fine. But then what the student ends up saying is not because it can lead to death, but because there are problems death causes. And so I had to think about that. I really had to think about that. And what I finally wrote on the student's paper was high funeral costs. And then, of course, I was thinking about, like, what an interesting reason to stay off drugs that was. Not that you don't want to die, but that you don't want your parents to get stuck with that funeral bill. But that's, of course, not what the student meant. But the thing is I think about everything you say. And so if you say this, I expect you to actually be talking about the problems that death causes. This is the beginning of a different poetry explication. So let's go through this. The poem On Being Told I Don't Speak Like a Black Person. This is a very stereotypical poem. Okay, that's not a sentence, and there's problems with format there. It's also very confusing because this poem is not stereotypical. The student then says, this poem shows the stereotypes people face, especially African Americans. That sentence is true, but that's the opposite of being stereotypical. Something that's stereotypical just, like, has those stereotypes there as if they're real. Showing the stereotypes makes something the opposite of stereotypical. The student means the second thing and said something wrong here. It shows how not all people are what they seem because people are raised differently. It doesn't matter what race they are, but what kind of people they're. No matter what way of speaking you have or are around, there will always be a way to communicate with others, whether it be hand gestures or some form of numerical code. Honestly, I believe that speaking properly shows what kind of person you are. It may be shallow, but it is how I get my first impression, and it stick with me. Now, this, of course, ended up being difficult because you can see all the mistakes, but then the students talking about judging other people based on how well they communicate, which is just begging for me to get out my biggest red pen and do the same thing. It also was really, really distracting because the students said that you can communicate via hand gestures. That's different than hand gestures. If you talk about a hand jester, that's a clown. Like in a poker deck, it's that joker. A jester is a court clown from the Middle Ages, and they have like, that sort of hat with the pieces on it and the pointy boots and stuff. And I actually, if we were in class, I would be pulling a hand jester puppet out of my backpack right now to show you. We of course aren't in class, but I do have him. And in fact, because he can't go to class with me during the pandemic, he has to stay home and torture the cats. This is him sneaking up on my cat Thoth while Thoth was sleeping. And this is Thoth waking up annoyed. But then a second later, Thoth is cool with it. And it's just like taking a bath while Yorick, my hand jester, pets him. But the whole point is, if you say you can communicate via hand gestures, I'm off in this world. I'm picturing trying to communicate with you via hand gestures. And that's not what you want me doing while I'm reading your paper. You want me reading your paper and understanding it and moving on to the next point, not off in some fantasy world with puppets. All right, let's get to the do not list. Don't use cliches. Cliches are those words and phrases that we all know the end to. Like if I say it's raining cats, you'll go and dogs. And so whenever you can finish that clause, that's a cliche and we're not going to use it. A lot of cliches don't even make sense as people are using it. Outside my comfort zone. This is a cliche, and I see it in almost every single draft when students are trying to get into medical school. You don't want a phrase in your personal statement that 99% of the other applicants are using in their personal statement, especially when that makes it useless and you're making the process of reading these even more boring. You want to be the person who stands out with good writing. Think outside the box. This is my least favorite cliche because students usually don't use it correctly. Like one student said that after we did a unit on advertising, she said, I really understand now that advertisers are just trying to get us to buy products. They're not actually trying to help us. And doing this unit has really made me think outside the box. Okay, that's not thinking outside the box. That is exactly what you should be thinking about advertisements. You're dead center in the box there. You're just thinking. And so one of the examples I like to give is, if we were on campus right now and class was about to get out and you might be hungry and maybe you say to your classmate, hey, instead of going to the MU, why don't we go 1/2 block on campus and have Raja's Indian buffet? You're not thinking outside the box of your lunch options. You're dead square still in the box of your lunch options. That's why other people will be there also having lunch. You're not thinking outside the box. Most of the time when people think outside the box, we are uncomfortable by that. It means to have a truly radical idea. Your think outside the box lunch options, if you're on the Davis campus, is, hey, there's a lot of fat squirrels on the quad. And they let you get really close to them. Even if you are eating squirrels raw on the quad, please don't use think outside the box because it's a cliche, even though, yes, you're totally thinking outside the box now. Let's not use colloquialisms. Those are regional phrases. In California, Northern California, we have hella. In the South, where I'm from, we have y'all. These just don't belong in academic writing. You shouldn't describe somebody else's argument as hella tight. Nothing. And you especially shouldn't combine these, right? Like you shouldn't say, hey, that was hella tight, y'all, because then you'll just be confusing people. We don't want to use vague language. Saying something is interesting, nice, or important, blah, it doesn't mean anything. All the time, when I have students evaluating other people's work, they end with, he does a good job. It's just a cliche. It's in everybody's conclusion. Get rid of it. It's general. We don't need it. I don't want you to make words bigger for no reason. Utilize means use. They mean exactly the same thing. And you're not impressing me when you IZE a word. And in fact, if you're doing your personal statements or your scholarship applications and they have character counts, you're definitely going to want to use use so that you can have some letters to actually say more good things about you as opposed to just using that bigger word. Signage, that means signs. You don't stop at the stop signage. You stop at the stop sign. I've had many students use the word suffrage. They will talk about how they want to end the suffrage of the little children in cages on the border. Except suffrage means the right to vote. It's not a fancy word for suffering. You know the word suffering. Use that. Don't try to go up higher into a word that you don't actually use and then just reveal that you don't know what words are. Keep it simple. Keep it clear. Use the right word for your audience. Don't make it bigger, again, for no reason. If there is a reason to use the bigger word, that's fine. But if you're just using the bigger word to use the bigger word, don't do it. I don't want you to mix up words that you can easily look up, of course. I already mentioned literally, which does not mean figuratively. Effect and affect. This is a noun. This is a verb. Imply and infer is about direction of information. I'm implying that you should not do these things in your paper. You should be inferring that you should remember not to do things in your paper. It's about giving and receiving. Then and than, different words. It's and theirs and yours. You've read now an article about a guy who gives grammar tests to all of his employees, and he explains you've had at least 10 years to understand the difference between it's and its. And if you don't know it, it's because you've decided it doesn't matter, that it's not important. And then that makes us think, okay, well, what else are you just going to decide isn't important if you're working for me or if you're, trying to get into this grad school or not? It's time to get the meaning down. Bias and biased I see mixed up a lot. Bias is a noun. It's something you have. If you have it, you are the adjective biased. Won't and want. I didn't used to see this when I started teaching over 20 years ago. It was when texting became popular that it started to happen. Want is not won't without the apostrophe. This is a completely different word, and that's why spell check isn't going to say anything to you about it. Some words have different meanings based on whether you write them out as one word or two. So a game can go into overtime, one word, but you're going to work on your papers over time. You might be a holdout for a raise, but then that verb is to hold out. Apart. We are apart from each other right now because of COVID-19, but this lesson is a part of what we're doing today. Often students will tell me they want me to overlook their papers, but they mean look over. Overlook, of course, means that I completely forget to read your paper, so this is the opposite. We just want to be careful and use the right form, and spell checker is not going to catch this stuff for you. You have to catch this stuff. I don't want you to write as if you're emailing or text messaging. My darlings, I do get papers with you written this way. I even got a paper once with I written this way in lowercase throughout most of the paper. And when I was making this presentation for you today, I, of course, had to fight with my computer to have this letter there. I had to fight with it. That's insane. I don't even know what that student wrote to have the paper that way. It wasn't an intentional choice. But I should not be getting, papers from you that I'm grading that are written in text speak. I don't want you to use unnecessary words. And this is cutting out that wordiness, being more concise. The fact is, you don't need it, especially because most of the time we say an opinion after it. Like, the fact is, that movie was awesome. Okay, not a fact. We don't ever need to say, I believe, I think, I feel, or it is my opinion that in our papers. And when your teachers tell you not to use first person, this is what they're talking about. I used to use these when I was an undergrad, and it was actually a way of not asserting my opinion strongly. And it would be because I was worried that my teacher was going to disagree with me. And so I'd be like, well, I believe that this scene is about blah, 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 blah. No, I just need to say this scene is about blah, blah, blah. And then I need to give evidence there. But I don't need to mark it as my belief. My name is on the paper. The teacher knows who believes that. If I write puppies are cute on my paper, my teacher isn't going to go, who thinks that though? If you take out, I think, I believe, I feel is my opinion, you won't be using first person in that way that your teachers don't like. Can you use first person? Of course, but that's when you actually have an anecdote or a story or some kind of personal experience that's going to be part of this. He is a man who, the he gives it away. If you said he is a plant who, I would be confused, but at least intrigued. You can just, you don't need to say he is a man who loves his family. You can just say he loves his family. Due to the fact that is because at the age of, okay, I don't need to say when I was at the age of 5. I can just say when I was 5. And I can get on with my life and have more words that actually have meaning in my paper. In order to, you never ever need this. And I promise you, in all of your papers, when I see in order to, you will see that I strike out in order. That's just how that's going to happen. Other common no-nos, and we're almost to the end. There are some things that aren't words, like ITS apostrophe. This is not a word at all. You can have ITS, you can have IT apostrophe S, you cannot have ITS apostrophe. Each other is always 2 words. Could of, would of, should of. This is another one that I didn't see when I first started teaching. This is when someone who doesn't read in English but just listens in English, they think that's what we're saying when we say could have, which is the contraction of could have. But it's always, always going to be could have, would have, should have, never of. A lot is not a word, it's 2 words, always. High school, also 2 words. Middle school and elementary school, people know to put those as 2 words, but high school is also 2. Try and should always be try to, like you don't try and pass the test, you try to pass the test. And then finally, this is a new mistake that I'm seeing a lot, and I don't actually know what's causing it yet. If you have an idea, let me know. But I keep seeing students try to say something like scientists. Scientists agree, but they'll leave the S off. And I know we don't pronounce it with emphasis on that last S, but it is there. Okay, that's it. Those are the pet peeves. I'm giving you this document in PDF form instead of in PowerPoint form so that you can go back and look at that before you turn in your papers. I will say you might have heard some rustling at one point in this presentation, and that is because my cat Gray Malkin was playing with some paper in a box, and I didn't want to start the presentation all over again. So I'm sorry about the rustling.